Mm. Hello. Good evening, my sweetheart. Hello, everyone. And here we are for another Wednesday, having a very comfy story reading stream. Oh, Olga, thank you so much for the head pats. Oh, you know how much I like them. You know I'm always happy to have people come in and give me head pats. I think it's super cute. But yeah, welcome in, everyone. I see you there, my dear Dice, and Rito, and Bard, who was once again first in, and Iro. Good morning. I did say that this week I will be taking a little more of a break from streaming, and then I kind of miscalculated. But, I did take the Monday off and the Friday that's upcoming, and then we'll see each other on Saturday for some fun collabs, for Electo's birthday, and then for some Stardew in the evening. But today, well, for today, I just couldn't miss one of our favorite story reading streams, especially since last week was a bit different. Last week I did Monster Prom on a Wednesday because it was the day after Valentine's Day, and I thought we could have something a little more spicy, something a little more unhinged. I think I think that would be quite fun though. Also for the future, just having Wednesdays for maybe some visual novels or other games in that direction. Or I might even stream on a Tuesday, depending on how busy things get around my house in real life. Ah, but that's not part of the stream right now. Right now, we're just here together, enjoying a most comfortable moment. I'm very happy to see everyone could make it because last time when we did a proper story reading stream, we made our way through an entire collection of Swiss fairy tales. And I gotta say, they sure were something. Quite interesting. From that collection, I think the ones I liked the most were the ones that involved actual fairies, the ones that transformed into flowers and covered the Swiss meadows all the way to the high Alps. Those were quite nice. So this time, we're going to be going to a slightly different country, the Netherlands, and there await us more fairy tales to read out to everyone. Let's see how many we get through today. Maybe four, maybe five, depending how long they are, and how much of a nice time we'll be having. I have some leftovers of my tea. I seem to have finished most of it before stream, but I do have some water. Oh, hello, LJ. I'm very happy to see you. I hope you're doing all right. We're just getting set up over here for some very nice and comfy story reading. Pouring myself some water to have at hand. I'm falling asleep, but I'm here. Well, that's the idea, LJ. Get nice and comfy and enjoy my voice as I read you to sleep. You should get very cozy and think about nothing else but a nice moment of comfort That's why we're here tonight. Okay. No, don't wanna. Can't make me sleep. Oh, really, sweetheart? I think that you are, in fact, going to fall right asleep very soon. The dreams will take you, their threads will pull you into the depths of your wildest imagination, of the kind of things that your mind can only make up while you are not entirely conscious and not at all in control. There I am. Ah, I missed my reading desk with everyone all lined up to keep me company while I read. Oh, thank you so much for the headband. The second one today. I'm very happy. Very cute. Very good. Ah, I do love my headbands. Aw, love you. Don't tell Electo. Aw, LJ. You're so sweet. Come here. Let me squish your cheek. You big sweetheart. Now, you don't want me to tell Electo? It's only because I'm tired? Well, if you're so tired and so sleepy, I know one very important place where you can lay down your head and close your eyes, and that is right here in Mommy's lap. Nobody's gonna see you, it's behind the desk. You should get nice and comfy. And that is also the pinned message for the stream for anybody who comes in. So, my darlings, enjoy the story time and enjoy a little bit of soft music with it. It won't be in the VOD, so if you're listening to this later on, you can play whatever it is you like. But right now, we just have some soft piano. And for tonight, we will be reading from the collection of Dutch fairy tales by William Elliot Griffis, the same person who wrote the Swiss fairy tales. So I'm quite curious how this one is going to turn out. The very first story in the collection, and the one that we will be starting with, is called The Entangled Mermaid. And it goes something like this. Long ago, in Dutch fairyland, there lived a young mermaid who was very proud of her good looks. She was one of a family of mer or lake folks dwelling not far from the sea. Her home was a great pool of water that was half salt and half fresh, for it lay around an island near the mouth of a river. Part of the day, when the sea tides were out, she splashed and played, dived and swam in the soft water of the inland current. When the ocean heaved and the salt water rushed in, the mermaid floated and frolicked and paddled to her heart's content. Her father was a grey-bearded merry man, and very proud of his handsome daughter. He owned an island near the river mouth, where the young mermaids held their picnics and parties and received the visits of young merrymen. Her mother and two aunts were merwomen. All of these were sober folks and attended to the business which occupies all well brought up mermaids and merrymen. This was to keep their pool clean and nice. No frogs, toads, or eels were allowed near, but in the work of daily house cleaning, the storks and the mermaids were great friends. All water creatures that were not thought to be polite and well behaved were expected to keep away. Even some silly birds, such as loons and plovers, and all screaming and fighting creatures with wings, were warned off the premises because they were not wanted. This family of merry folks liked to have a nice quiet time by themselves, without any rude folks on legs, or with wings or fins from the outside. Indeed, they wished to make their pool a model for all respectable mermaids and merrymen for 10 leagues around. It was very funny to see the old daddy merman, with a switch made of reeds, shooing off the saucy birds, such as the sandpipers and screeching gulls. For the bullfrogs, too big for the storks to swallow, and for impudent fishes, he had a whip made of seaweed. Of course, all the mermaids in good society were welcome, but young mermen were allowed to call only once a month during the week when the moon was full. Then the evenings were usually clear, so that when the party broke up, the mermen could see their way in the moonlight to swim home safely with their mermaid friends. For there were sea monsters that loved to plague the merfolk, and even threatened to eat them up. The mermaids, dear creatures, had to be escorted home, but they felt safe, for their merman brothers and daddies were so fierce that, except sharks, even the larger fish, such as porpoises and dolphins, were afraid to come near them. One day, Daddy and the mother left to visit some relatives near the island of Urk. They were to be gone several days. Meanwhile, their daughter was to have a party, her aunts being the chaperones. The mermaids usually held their picnics on an island in the midst of the pool. Here they would sit and sun themselves. They talked about the fashions and the prettiest way to dress their hair. Each one had a pocket mirror, but where they kept these while swimming, no mortal ever found out. They made wreaths of bright colored seaweed, orange and black, blue, grey and red, and wore them on their brows like coronets. Or they twined them along the sea berries and bubble blossoms among their tresses. Sometimes they made girdles of the strongest and knotted them around their waists. Every once in a while, they chose a queen of beauty for their ruler. Then each of the others pretended to be a princess. Their games and sports often lasted all day, and they were very happy. Swimming out in the salt water, the mermaids would go in quest of pearls, coral, ambergris, and other pretty things. These they would bring to their queen, or with them richly adorned themselves. Thus the mermaid queen and her maidens made a court of beauty that was famed wherever mermaids and merrymen lived. They often talked about human maids. "How funny it must be to wear clothes," said one. "Are they cold that they have to keep warm?" It was a little chit of a mermaid, whose flippers had hardly begun to grow into hands, that asked this question. How can they swim with petticoats on? Asked another. My brother heard that real men wear wooden shoes. These must bother them when on the water to have their feet floating, said a third, whose name was Silver Scales. What a pity they don't have flukes like us. And then she looked at her own glistening scaly coat in admiration. I can hardly believe it, said a mermaid, that was very proud of her fine figure and slender waist. Their girls can't be half as pretty as we are. Well, I should like to be a real woman for a while, just to try it, and see how it feels to walk on legs, said another, rather demurely, as if afraid of other mermaids might not like her remark. They didn't. Out sounded a lusty chorus. No, no, horrible! What an idea! Who wouldn't be a mermaid? Why, I've heard, cried one, that real women have to work, wash their husbands' clothes, milk cows, dig potatoes, scrub floors, and take care of calves. Who would be a woman? Not I. And her snub nose, since it could not turn up, grew wide at the roots. She was sneering at the idea that a creature in petticoats could ever look lovelier than one in shining scales. Besides, she said, think of their big noses, and I'm told, too, that girls even have to wear hairpins. At this, the very thought that anyone should have to bind up their tresses, there was a shock of disgust with some, while others clapped their hands, partly in envy and partly in glee. But the funniest things the mermaids heard of were gloves, and they laughed heartily over such things as covers for the fingers. Just for fun, one of the little mermaids used to draw some bag-like seaweed over her hands to see how such things looked. One day, while sunning themselves in the grass on the island, one of their number found a bush on which foxgloves grew. Plucking these, she covered each one of her fingers with a red flower. Then, flopping over to the other girls, she held up her gloved hands. Half in fright and half in envy, they heard her story. After listening, the party was about to break up when suddenly a young merman splashed into view. The tide was running out and the stream low, so he had had hard work to get through the fresh water of the river and to the island. His eyes drooped salt water as if he were crying. He looked tired while puffing and blowing, and he could hardly get his breath. The queen of the mermaids asked him what he meant by coming among her maids at such an hour and in such condition. At this, the bashful merman began to blubber. Some of the mer-girls put their hands over their mouths to hide their laughing, while they winked at each other, and their eyes showed how they enjoyed the fun. To have a merman among them at that hour in broad daylight and crying was too much for dignity. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, and the merman still wept salt-water tears as he tried to catch his breath. At last he talked sensibly. He warned the queen that a party of horrid men in wooden shoes, with pickaxes, spades, and pumps, were coming to drain the swamp and pump out the pool. He had heard that they would make the river a canal and build a dike that should keep out the ocean. Alas, alas, cried one mermaid, wringing her hands. Where shall we go when our pool is destroyed? We can't live in the ocean all the time. Then she wept copiously. The salt water tears fell from her great round eyes in big drops. Hush, cried the queen. I don't believe the merman's story. He only tells it to frighten us. It's just like him. In fact, the queen suspected that the merman's story was all a sham, and that he had come among her maids with a set purpose to run off with silver scales. She was one of the prettiest mermaids in the company, but very young, vain, and frivolous. It was no secret that she and the merman were in love and wanted to get married. So the queen, without even thanking him, dismissed the swimming messenger. After dinner, the company broke up, and the queen retired to her cave to take a long nap. She was quite tired after entertaining so much company. Besides, since Daddy and Mother were away, and there were no beaux to entertain, since it was a dark night and no moon shining on the water, why need she get up early in the morning? So the Mermaid Queen slept much longer than ever before. Indeed, it was not till near sunset the next day that she awoke. Then, taking her comb and mirror in hand, she started to swim and splash in the pool in order to smooth out her tresses and get ready for supper. But oh, what a change from the day before! What was the matter? All around her, things looked different. The water had fallen low, and the pool was nearly empty. The river, instead of flowing, was as quiet as a pond. Such horrors! When she swam forward, what should she see but a dike and fences? An army of horrid men had come, when she was asleep, and built a dam. They had fenced round the swamp and were actually beginning to dig sluices to drain the land. Some were at work, building a windmill to help in pumping out the water. The first thing she knew, she had bumped her pretty nose against the dam. She thought at once of escaping over the logs and into the sea. When she tried to clamber over the top and get through the fence, her hair got so entangled between the bars that she had to throw away her comb and mirror and try to untangle her tresses. The more she tried, the worse became the tangle. Soon her long hair was all twisted up in the timber. In vain were her struggles to escape. She was ready to die with fright when she saw 4 horrid men rush up to seize her. She attempted to waddle away, but her long hair held her to the post and rails. Her modesty was so dreadfully shocked that she fainted away. When she came to herself, she found she was in a big, long tub. A crowd of curious little girls and boys were looking at her, for she was on show as a great curiosity. They were bound to see her and get their money's worth in looking, for they had paid a stiver, 2 cents, admission to the show. Again, before all these eyes, Her modesty was so shocked that she gave one groan, flopped over, and died in the tub. Woe to the poor father and mother at Urk. They came back to find their old home gone. Unable to get into it, they swam out to sea, never stopping till they reached Spitzbergen. What became of the body of the Mermaid Queen? Learned men came from Leiden to examine what was now only a specimen and to see how mermaids were made up. Then her skin was stuffed and glass eyes put in where her shining orbs had been. After this, her body was stuffed and mounted in the museum, that is, set up above a glass case and resting upon iron rods. Artists came to Leiden to make pictures of her, and no fewer than 9 noblemen copied her pretty form and features into their coats of arms. Instead of the mermaid's pool is now a cheese farm of 50 cows, a fine house and a barn, and a family of pink-cheeked, yellow-haired children who walk and play in wooden shoes. So this particular mermaid, all because of her entanglement in the fence, was more famous when stuffed than when living, while all her young friends and older relatives were forgotten. And that is the end of the first story. Oh my goodness, sweethearts. I didn't quite expect it to take such a turn. In the end, the mermaid didn't heed the warning of the messenger and died. Well, I suppose sometimes that is how things end up. LJ, what's this? Daddy Merman? Whip me, Daddy Merman? That's quite funny. Thank you for the story. I really will fall asleep now, so I'll say good night. Of course. Good night, LJ. I hope you have the most wonderful of dreams. Take care now. And thank you so much, Lauren Haley, for the follow. I do appreciate it. Love you, OLJ. You're so sweet. Take care, darling, okay? Come back soon. Well, another day. Scholars from Leiden. I swear it wasn't me. Bard, are you sure? Maybe you were right there, amongst all the scholars, looking at this most precious mermaid who couldn't quite make it out alive. I'm sure she would have been envious of your beauty. Now, I wonder if the next story is also going to take quite a twist. The second story in our collection is called The Boy Who Wanted More Cheese. And it goes something like this. Klaas van Bommel was a Dutch boy, 12 years old, who lived where cows were plentiful. He was over 5 feet high, weighed 100 pounds, and had rosy cheeks. His appetite was always good, and his mother declared his stomach had no bottom. His hair was of a color halfway between a carrot and a sweet potato. It was as thick as reeds in a swamp, and was cut level from under one ear to another. Klaas stood in a pair of timber shoes that made an awful rattle when he ran fast to catch a rabbit or scuffed slowly along to school over the brick road of his village. In summer, Klaas was dressed in a rough blue linen blouse. In winter, he wore woolen breeches as wide as coffee bags. They were called bell trousers, and in shape were like a couple of cowbells turned upwards. These were buttoned on to a thick warm jacket. Until he was 5 years old, Klaas was dressed like his sisters. Then on his birthday, he had boy's clothes with 2 pockets in them, of which he was proud enough. Klaas was a farmer's boy. He had rye bread and fresh milk for breakfast. At dinner time, beside cheese and bread, he was given a plate heaped with boiled potatoes. Into these he first plunged a fork and then dipped each round white ball into a bowl of hot melted butter. Very quickly, then, did potato and butter disappear down the red lane. At supper, he had bread and skimmed milk, left after the cream had been taken off with a saucer to make butter. Twice a week, the children enjoyed a bowl of bonnyclabber or curds, with a little brown sugar sprinkled on the top. But at every meal there was cheese, usually in thin slices, which the boy thought not thick enough. When Klaas went to bed, he usually fell asleep as soon as his shock of yellow hair touched the pillow. In summertime, he slept till the birds began to sing at dawn. In winter, when the bed felt warm and Jack Frost was lively, he often heard the cows talking in their way before he jumped out of his bag of straw, which served for a mattress. The Van Bommels were not rich, but everything was shining clean. There was always plenty to eat at the Van Bommels' house. Stacks of rye bread, a yard long and thicker than a man's arm, stood on end in the corner of the cool stone-lined basement. The loaves of dough were put in the oven once a week. Baking time was a great event at the Van Bommels, and no menfolks were allowed in the kitchen on that day unless they were called in to help. As for the milk pails and pans, filled or emptied, scrubbed or set in the sun every day to dry, and the cheeses piled up in the pantry, they seemed sometimes enough to feed a small army. But Klaas always wanted more cheese. In other ways, he was a good boy, obedient at home, always ready to work on the cow farm and diligent in school. But at the table, he never had enough. Sometimes his father laughed and asked him if he had a well or a cave under his jacket. Klaas had 3 younger sisters, Trintje, Anneke, and Saartje, which is Dutch for Kate, Annie, and Sally. These, their fond mother, who loved them dearly, called her orange blossoms. But when at dinner, Klaas would keep on, dipping his potatoes into the hot butter, while others were all through. His mother would laugh and call him her buttercup. but always Class wanted more cheese. When unusually greedy, she twitted him as a boy worse than butter and eggs, that is, as troublesome as the yellow and white part, called toadflax, is to the farmer. Very pretty, but nothing but a weed. One summer's evening, after a good scolding, which he deserved well, Class, moped and almost crying, went to bed in bad humor. He had teased each one of his sisters to give him her bit of cheese, and this, added to his own slice, made his stomach feel as heavy as lead. Class's bed was up in the garret. When the house was first built, one of the red tiles of the roof had been taken out, and another one, made of glass, was put in its place. In the morning, this gave the boy light to put on his clothes. At night, in fair weather, it supplied air to his room. A gentle breeze was blowing from the pine woods on the sandy slope not far away. So Class climbed up on the stool to sniff the sweet piney odors. He thought he saw lights dancing under the tree. One beam seemed to approach his roof hole, and coming nearer, played round the chimney. Then it passed to and fro in front of him. It seemed to whisper in his ear as it moved by. It looked very much as if 100 fireflies had united their cold light into one lamp. Then Class thought that the strange beams bore the shape of a lovely girl, but he only laughed at himself at the idea. Pretty soon, however, he thought the whisper became a voice. Again he laughed so heartily that he forgot his moping and the scolding his mother had given him. In fact, his eyes twinkled with delight, and the voice gave this invitation. There's plenty of cheese. Come with us. To make sure of it, the sleepy boy now rubbed his eyes and cocked his ears. Again, the light bearer spoke to him. Come. Could it be? He had heard old people tell of the ladies of the wood that whispered and warned travelers. In fact, he himself had often seen the fairies' ring in the pine woods. To this, the flame lady was inviting him. Again and again, the moving cold light circled round the red tile roof, which the moon, then rising and peeping over the chimneys, seemed to turn into silver plates. As the disk rose higher in the sky, he could hardly see the moving light that had looked like a lady, but the voice, no longer a whisper, as at first, was now even plainer. There's plenty of cheese. Come with us. I'll see what it is, anyhow, said Class, as he drew on his thick woolen stockings and prepared to go downstairs and out without waking a soul. At the door, he stepped into his wooden shoes. Just then, the cat purred and rubbed up against his shins. He jumped, for he was scared, but looking down for a moment, he saw the 2 bowls of yellow fire in her head and knew what they were. Then he sped to the pine woods and towards the fairy ring. What an odd sight! At first, Klaas thought it was a circle of big fireflies. Then he saw clearly that there were dozens of pretty creatures, hardly as large as dolls, but as lively as crickets. They were as full of light as if lamps had wings. Hand in hand, they flitted and danced around the ring of grass, as if this was fun. Hardly had Klaas got over his first surprise, then of a sudden he felt himself surrounded by the fairies. Some of the strongest among them had left the main party in the circle and come to him. He felt himself pulled by their dainty fingers. One of them, the loveliest of all, whispered in his ear, "Come, you must dance with us." Then a dozen of the pretty creatures murmured in chorus, "Plenty of cheese here, plenty of cheese here, come, come." Upon this, the heels of Klaas seemed as light as a feather. In a moment, with both hands clasped in those of the fairies, he was dancing in high glee. It was as much fun as if he were at a kermis, with a row of boys and girls, hand in hand, swinging along the streets, as Dutch maids and youth do during kermis week. Klaas had not time to look hard at the fairies, for he was too full of the fun. He danced and danced all night, and until the sky in the east began to turn, first grey and then rosy. Then he tumbled down, tired out, and fell asleep. His head lay on the inner curve of the fairy ring, with his feet in the center. Klaas felt very happy, for he had no sense of being tired, and he did not know he was asleep. He thought his fairy parents, who had danced with him, were now waiting on him to bring him cheeses. With a golden knife, they sliced them off and fed him out of their own hands. How good it tasted! He thought now he could and would eat all the cheese he had longed for all his life. There was no mother to scold him or daddy to shake his finger at him. How delightful! But by and by he wanted to stop eating and rest a while. His jaws were tired. His stomach seemed to be loaded with cannonballs. He gasped for breath. But the fairies would not let him stop, for Dutch fairies never get tired. Flying out of the sky from the north, south, east, and west, they came, bringing cheeses. These they dropped down around him until the piles of the round masses threatened first to enclose him as with a wall, and then to overtop him. There were the red balls from Edam, the pink and yellow spheres from Gouda, and the grey loaf-shaped ones from Leiden. Down through the vista of sand in the pine woods he looked, and oh horrors! There were the tallest and strongest of the fairies rolling along the huge, round, flat cheeses from Friesland, and one of these was as big as a cartwheel and would feed a regiment. These fairies trundled the heavy discs along as if they were playing with hoops. They shouted hilariously as, with a pine stick, They beat them forward like boys at play. Farm cheese, factory cheese, Alkmaar cheese, and to crown all, cheese from Limburg, which Klaas never could bear because of its strong odor. Soon the cakes and bowls were heaped so high around him that the boys, as he looked up, felt like a frog in a well. He groaned when he thought the high cheese walls were tottering to fall on him. Then he screamed, but the fairies thought he was making music. Then, they not being human, do not know how the boy felt. At last, with a thick slice in one hand and a big hunk in the other, he could eat no more cheese. Though the fairies, led by their queen, standing on one side or hovering over his head, still urged him to take more. At this moment, while afraid that he would burst, Glass saw the pile of cheeses, as big as a house, topple over. The heavy mass fell inward upon him. With a scream of terror, he thought himself crushed as flat as a Friesland cheese. But he wasn't. Waking up and rubbing his eyes, he saw the red sun rising on the sand dunes. Birds were singing, and the chickens were crowing all around him in chorus, as if saluting him. Just then, also, the village clock chimed out the hour. He felt his clothes. They were wet with dew. He sat up to look around. There were no fairies, but in his mouth was a bunch of grass, which he had been chewing. Klaas never would tell the story of his night with the fairies, nor has he yet settled the question whether they left him because the cheese house of his dream had fallen, or because daylight had come. And that is the end of the next story. Well, that one was certainly interesting. Had a little bit of a fever dream. Certainly had the time of his life, this sweet class boy. Oh, well, oh, hello and welcome, Moogie. I'm very happy to see you. Just dropping in to say hi and that I'm in the new house. Oh, that's very delightful to hear. Oh my goodness. I hope that your move is going well and that you have all of your squishmallows with you. All of them should be here with you to keep you company and keep you nice and cozy, all nice and soft. Okay, I gotta go again, might be back. But OMG, Bard and Amber, y'all are so sexy. I'm gonna. Okay. Okay, Mookie. You're just an absolute darling. And then you're back with Noms? Noms good. Is it a tower of cheese that might overthrow to fall on you and crush you in your dreams? I hope not. I hope you have very nice noms. Tell me about them. What did you get? Yo, Kermis? Fucking pog. Bard, what is Kermis? I'm not familiar with the Dutch concept, but you might be. Something gives me the idea that you know what it is. Tack, hello. I'm happy to see you. I hope you're having a wonderful time of day. And that you've come here to be cozy with all of us as we go through some Dutch fairy tales tonight. Oh, you have chicken nuggies? Oh, that's just so sweet. When did I have chicken nuggies last? Maybe a couple of weeks ago. Hmm. Oh, okay. So Kermis is like a traveling fun fair kind of thing. They have small amusement rides, food vendors, gotcha machine. Okay, okay. That sounds that sounds pretty entertaining. Yeah. Like a I guess a street fair or a small sort of carnival or sideshows. I don't know. Hmm. Tech you say that is like a carnival. Okay. Yeah. It makes sense. A lot of fun to be had for sure. Hmm. I wonder what that would be like to go to such a cute amusement park, especially in the evening with all the lights and the music and the sounds of laughter and so much fun. But then we also have Carnival, which is Carnival but different. Yes, that one is different. That's the one where you have like parades along the streets and everything. I remember that also from Germany. Yes, so that's very different. All right. Mm-mm. Must be a lot of fun things to experience out in the world. That kind of carnival is called Fastnacht here in Switzerland. Okay. I wonder if that's the one that was called something like Fasching in Germany. Hmm. I vaguely remember these words. I must admit, in all my time spent in Germany, I haven't really learned the language. English for me it is. Okay, sweethearts. Let's go on to the next story. This one is called The Princess with 20 Petticoats. And it goes something like this. Long, long ago, before. Oh, Electo! We're just getting started with another story, so I'll say hi to you. You've stopped by just to say hi and that you love me. Oh, sweetheart. You're just so adorable. I'm glad you stopped by. Good luck at work. I'm happy to see you here. So, let's read this next story. The Princess with 20 Petticoats. Long, long ago, before ever blue flax flower bloomed in Holland, and when Dutch mothers wore wolfskin clothes, there was a little princess, very much beloved by her father, who was a great king or war chief. She was very pretty and fond of seeing herself. There were no metal mirrors in those days, nor any looking glass. So she went into the woods and before the pools and the deep, quiet watercourses made reflection of her own lovely face. Of this pleasure she never seemed weary. Yet, sometimes, this little princess was very naughty. Then her temper was not nearly so sweet as her face. She would play in the sand and roll around in the woods among the leaves and bushes until her curls were all tangled up. When her nurse combed out her hair with a stone comb, for no other kinds were then known, she would fret and scold and often stamp her foot. When very angry, she called her nurse or governess an aurochs, a big beast like a buffalo. At this, the maid put up her hands to her face. Me, an aurochs, horrible! Then she would feel her forehead to see if horns were growing there. The nurse, they called her governess, as the years went on, grew tired of the behavior of the bad young princess. Sometimes she went and told her mother how naughty her daughter was, even to calling her an aurochs. Then the little girl only showed her bad temper worse. She rolled among the leaves all the more and mussed up her ringlets, so that the governess could hardly comb them out smooth again. It seemed useless to punish the perverse little maid. They even tried to improve her temper by taking away her dinner, but it did no good. Then the governess and mother went together to her father. When they complained of his daughter to the king, he was much worried. He could fight strong men with his club and spear, and even giants with his sword and battle axe. But how to correct his little daughter, whom he loved as his own eyes, was too much for him. He had no son, and the princess was his only child, and the hopes of the family all rested on her. The king wondered how she would govern his people after he should die and she became the queen. Yet he was glad for one thing, that with all her naughtiness, she was like her father, always kind to animals. Her pet was a little aurochs calf. Some hunters had killed the mother of the poor little thing in winter time, so the princess kept the creature warm and it fed out of her hand daily. It was in gloom and with a sad face that the king walked in the woods, thinking how to make a sweet-tempered lady out of his petulant daughter, who was fast growing up to be a tall, fine-looking woman. Now, when the king had himself been a little boy, he was very kind to all living creatures, wild and tame, and yes, even to the trees in the forest. When a prince, the boy would never let the axeman cut down an oak until they first begged pardon of the fairy that lived in the tree. There was one big oak, especially, which was near the mansion of his father, the king. It was said that the doctors found little babies in its leafy branches and brought them to their mothers. The prince boy took great care of this tree. He was taught by a wise man to cut off the dead limbs, keep off the worms, and warn away all people seeking to break off branches, even for Yuletide, which came at our Christmas time. Once, when some hunters had chased a young she-aurochs with her two calves into the king's park, the prince, though he was then only a boy, ran out and drove the rough fellows away. Then he sheltered and fed the aurochs family of three until they were fresh and fat. After this, he sent a skilled hunter to imitate the sound of an aurochs mother to call the aurochs father to the edge of the woods. He then let them all go free and was happy to see the brutes frisking together. Now that the boy prince was grown to be a man and had long been king and had forgotten all about the incident of his earlier years, he was one day walking in the forest. Suddenly, a gentle breeze arose, and the leaves of the old oak tree began first to rustle and then to whisper. Soon the words were clear, and the spirit in the oak said, I have seen 1,000 years pass by since I was an acorn planted here. In a few moments I shall die and fall down. Cut my body into staves. Of these make a wooden petticoat like a barrel for your daughter. When her temper is bad, let her put it on and wear it until she promises to be good. The king was sad at the thought of losing the grand old tree under which he had played as a boy and his fathers before him. "Cheer up, my friend," said the oak, "for something better shall follow. When I pass away, you will find on this spot a blue flower growing. Where the forest was shall be fields on which the sun shines. Then, if your daughter be good, young women shall spin something prettier than wooden petticoats. Watch for the blue flower. Moreover," added the voice of the tree, "that I may not be forgotten, do you take henceforth as your family name Ten Ik, which in Dutch means at the oak." At this moment, a huge aurochs rushed into the wood. Its long hair and shaggy mane were grey with age. The king, thinking the beast would lower his horns and charge at him, drew his sword to fight the mighty brute that seemed to weigh well nigh a ton. But the aurochs stopped within 10 feet of the king and bellowed. But in a minute or two, the bellowing changed to a voice, and the king heard these good words: "I die with the oak, for we are brothers, kept under an enchantment for 1,000 years, which is to end in a few moments. Neither a tree nor an aurochs can forget your kindness to us when you were a prince. As soon as our spirits are released, and we both go back to our home in the moon, saw off my right horn, and make of it a comb for use on your daughter's curls. It will be smoother than stone." In a moment, a tempest arose, which drove the king for shelter behind some rocks near by. After a few minutes, the wind ceased and the sky was clear. The king looked, and there lay the oak, fallen at full length, and the aurochs lay lifeless beside it. Just then, the king's woodmen, who were out, thinking their master might be hurt, drew near. He ordered them to take out the right horn of the aurochs and to split up part of the oak for staves. The next day they made a wooden petticoat and a horn comb. They were such novelties they knew that nearly every woman in the kingdom came to see them. After this, the king called himself the Lord of the land of Ten Ik, and ever after this was his family name, which all his descendants bore. Whenever the princess showed bad temper, she was forced to wear the wooden petticoat. To have the boys and girls point at her and make fun of her was severe punishment. But a curious thing took place. It was found that every time the maid combed the hair of the princess, she became gentler and more sweet-tempered. She often thanked her governess and said she liked to have her curls smoothed with the new comb. She even begged her father to let her own one and have the comb all to herself. It was not long before she surprised her governess and her parents by combing and curling her own hair. In truth, such a wonderful change came over the princess that she did not often have to wear the wooden petticoat, and after a year or two, not at all. so the gossips nearly forgot all about it. One summer's day, as the princess was walking in the open, sunny space where the old oak had stood, she saw a blue flower. It seemed as beautiful as it was strange. She plucked it and put it in her hair. When she reached home, her old aunt, who had been in southern lands, declared it to be flower of the flax. During that spring, millions of tiny green blades sprang up where the forest had been, and when summer came, the plants were half a yard high. The women learned how to put the stalks in water, and fiber was made of the flax. Then they took the silken like strands from the inside and spun them on their spinning wheels. Then they wove them into pretty cloth. This, when laid out on the grass under the sunshine, was bleached white. The flax thread was made first into linen and then into lace. Let us name the place Grunewald, green field, the happy people cried when they saw how green the earth was where had been the dark forest. So the place was ever after called the green field. Now, when the princess saw what pretty clothes the snow-white linen made, she invented a new style of dress. The upper garment, or rock, that is the one above the waist, she called the boven rock, and the lower one beneath the waist, her beneden rock. In Dutch, boven means above, and benden means beneath. By and by, when at the looms more of the beautiful white linen was woven, she had a new petticoat made and put it on. She was so delighted with this one that she wanted more. One after the other, she belted them around her waist until she had on 20 petticoats at a time. Proud she was of her skirts, even though they made her look like a barrel. When her mother and maids and all the women of Grunewald, young and old, saw the princess set the fashion, they all followed. It was not always easy for poor girls who were to be married to buy as many as 20 petticoats, but as it was the fashion, every bride had to obey the rule. It grew to be the custom to have at least 20, for only this number was thought proper. So, a new rule, even among the men, grew up. A betrothed young man, or his female relatives assisting him, were accustomed to make a present of one or more petticoats to his sweetheart to increase her wardrobe. Thus, the fashion prevailed and still holds among the women of the coast. Tall or short, they pile on the petticoats and swing their skirts proudly as they walk to go to market, sell their fish, cry fresh herring in the streets, or do their knitting at home or in front of their houses. In some parts of the country, nothing makes a girl so happy as to present her with a new petticoat. It is the fashion to have a figure like a barrel and wear one's clothes so as to look like a small hogshead. By and by, the men built a dam to get plenty of water in winter for the treating of the flax stalks. The linen industry made the people rich, In time, a city sprang up, which they called Rotterdam, or the dam where they rotted the flax. And because where had been a forest of oaks, with the pool and rivulet, there was now a silvery stream flowing gently between verdant meadows. They made the arms and seal of the city green and white, two of the former and one of the later, that is, verdure and silver. To this day, on the arms and flags of the great city, and on the high smokestacks of the mighty steamers that cross the ocean from land to land, one sees the wide, white band between the two broad stripes of green. And that is the end of that story. Oh, well, that was quite interesting. I suppose it was a bit of an origin story of how the coat of arms of Rotterdam came to be, right? Or maybe of the city where the green field was once. I quite like that. Had a little bit of a magical twist to it in the end. Well, hello there, your local cat boy. Hi, happy to see you. We are doing the usual Wednesday story reading stream, so I hope you'll get comfy as I carry on with reading a little bit more. Interesting because now the Bendon Rock is actually called an Onderrock, which is underskirt. Okay, interesting. Ayo, my birthplace, Rotterdam, is that the one? Or was it the other place, the green forest, whatever it was called? I don't know. Ah, Rotterdam, yeah, okay. Very nice. I always wanted to visit. It seems quite lovely. I might just have to go for a bit of a Euro trip. And by Euro trip, I literally mean just up to Rotterdam. We have an open air called Greenfield here. That sounds very lovely, Tech. Story time. Hi, Fairview. Yes, it is story time indeed. I have made my way through, I think, 3 now? It was either 2 or 3. I'm not sure anymore. I think it was 3. The first one was about a mermaid who ended up being tangled in a fence and then died. It was a little sad. They took her body and put it on display in a museum. And then the second one was about a boy who had quite the dream. He was spirited away by the fairies who fed him cheese of all sorts. That poor boy must have been tripping on some shrooms for sure. And then the latest story was about a princess who had quite a bad temper and personality, but eventually grew out of it and established the new fashion of wearing a lot of layers. So far, I have to say, I'm quite enjoying myself with these stories. I hope you are too, my darlings. I hope they are most comforting and very gentle. Let's see what the next one is about. The title of this one is The Cat and the Cradle. But first, I think I should drink some tea and maybe even some water. All this breathing. I have to make sure that my throat is properly hydrated. After all, I have to take care of my voice. It would be such a shame if I couldn't be here and read you these stories, my sweethearts, if I forgot to drink plenty of water. Same goes for you. Make sure to grab a drink of anything that you have at hand. Hmm. Now, let's get to our next story, The Cat and the Cradle. It goes something like this. In the early ages, when our far off ancestors lived in the woods, ate acorns, slept in caves, and dressed in the skins of wild animals, they had no horses, cows, or cats. Their only pets and helpers were dogs. The men and the dogs were more like each other than they are now. However, they knew about bees. So the women gathered honey, and from it they made mead. Not having any sugar, the children enjoyed tasting honey more than anything else, and it was the only sweet thing they had. By and by, cows were brought into the country, and the Dutch soil being good for grass, the cows had plenty to eat. When these animals multiplied, the people drank milk and learned to make cheese and butter. So the Dutch boys and girls grew strong and healthy. The oxen were so strong that they could pull logs of wood or draw a plough. So, little by little, the forests were cut down, and grassy meadows full of bright colored flowers took their place. Houses were built, and the people were prosperous and happy. Yet there were still many cruel men and bad people in the land. Sometimes, too, floods came and drowned the cattle and covered the fields with sand or salt water. In such times, food was very scarce. Thus it happened that not all the babies born could live, or every little child be fed. It grew to be the custom that families would hold a council and decide whether the baby should be raised or not. But if anyone should give the infant even a tiny drop of milk or food of any kind, it was allowed to live and grow up. If no one gave it milk or honey, it died. No matter, no matter how much a mother might love her baby, she was not allowed to put milk to its lips if the grandmother or elders forbade it. The young bride, coming into her husband's home, always had to obey his mother, for she was now as a daughter and one of the family. All lived together in one house, and the grandmother ruled all the women and girls that were under one roof. This was the way of the world, when our ancestors were not always as kind as our own mothers and fathers are now. Many times was the old grandmother angry when her son had taken a wife and a girl was born. If the old woman expected a grandson who should grow up to be a fighter with sword and spear, and it turned out to be a girl, she was mad as fire. Now, when the good missionaries came into Friesland, one of the first of the families to receive the gospel was one named Alfred. With his bride, Alfred helped the missionary build a church. By the by, a sweet little baby was born in the family, and the parents were very happy. They loved the little thing as fathers and mothers love their children now. But when someone went and told the grandmother that the new baby was a girl instead of a boy, The old woman flew into a rage and would have gone at once to get hold of the baby and spirit it away. Her old age, however, made her move slowly, and she could not find her crutch. For the midwife, who knew the bad temper of the grandmother, had purposely hid it. The old woman was angry because she did not want any more girls in the big house, where she thought there were already too many mouths to fill. Food was hard to get, and there were not enough war men to defend the tribe. But the midwife, who was a neighbor, feared that the old woman was malicious, and so she had hidden her crutch. This she did so that if the baby was a girl, she could save its life. The midwife was a good woman who had been taught that this world loves little girls as well as boys. So when the midwife heard the grandmother storm and rave while hunting for her crutch, she ran first to the honey jar, dipped her forefinger in it, and put some drops of honey on the baby's tongue. Then she passed it out the window to some friends who were waiting outside. She knew the law that if a child tasted food, it must be allowed to live. The kind women took the baby to their home and fed it carefully. A hole was drilled in the small end of a cow's horn, and the warm milk, fresh from the cow, was allowed to fall, drop by drop, into the baby's mouth. In a few days, the little one was able to suck its breakfast slowly out of the horn, while one of the girls held it. So the baby grew bigger every day, and all the time it was carefully hidden. The foolish old grandmother was foiled, for she could never find out where the baby girl was, which all this time was growing strong and plump. Her father secretly made her a cradle, and he and the babe's mother came often to see their child. Everyone called her Little Honey. Now, about this time, cats were brought into the country, and the children made sure pets of them, and that some of the cows seemed to be jealous of the attention paid to the kittens. These were the days where cows and people all lived under one long roof. The children learned to tell the time of day, whether it was morning, noon, or night, by looking into the cat's eyes. These seemed to open and shut, very much as if they had doors. The fat cat, which was brought into the house where little Honey was, seemed to be very fond of the little girl, and the two, the cat and the child, played much together. It was often said that the cat loved the baby even more than her own kittens. Everyone called the affectionate animal by the nickname of Dubbeltje, which means little double, because this kitten was twice as loving as most cat mothers are. When her own furry little babies were very young, she carried them from one place to another in her mouth. But this way of holding kittens she never tried on the baby. She seemed to know better. Indeed, Little Double often wondered why human babies were born so naked and helpless, for at an age when her kittens could feed themselves and run about and play with their tails and with each other, little Honey was not yet able to crawl. But other dangers were in store for the little girl. One day, when the men were out hunting and the women went to the woods to gather nuts and acorns, a great flood came. The waters washed away the houses so that everything floated into the great river and then down towards the sea. What would become of our baby? She thought the parents of little Honey when they came back to find the houses swept away and no sign of their little daughter. Little Double and her kittens and all the cows were gone too. So now it had happened that when the flood came and the houses crashed down, the baby was sound asleep. The cat, leaving its kittens, that were now pretty well grown up, leaped up and onto the top of the cradle, and the two floated off together. Pretty soon they found themselves left alone, with nothing in sight that was familiar, except one funny thing. That was a wooden shoe, in which was a fuzzy little yellow chicken, hardly 4 days old. It had been playing in the shoe when the floods came and swept it off from under the very beak of the old hen that, with all her other chicks, was washed away. On and on, the raging flood bore the baby and cat until dark night came down. For hours more they drifted until happily the cradle was swept into an eddy in front of a village. There it spun round and round, and might soon have been borne into the greater flood, which seemed to roar louder as the waters rose. Now a cat can see sometimes in the night, better even than in the day, for the darker it becomes, the wider open the eyes of cats. In bright sunshine at noon, the inside doors of the cat's eyes close to a narrow slit, while at night these doors open wide. That is the reason why, in the days before clocks and watches were made, the children could tell about the time of day by looking at the cat's eyes. Sometimes they named their cats Clock Eye or Bell Eye, for bell clocks are older than clocks with a dial, and because in Holland the bells ring out the hours and quarter hours. The cat looked up and saw the church tower looming up in the dark. At once she began to meow and caterwaul with all her might. She hoped that someone in one of these houses near the river bank might catch the sound, but none seemed to hear or heed. At last, when the cat was nearly dead with howling, a light appeared at one of the windows. This showed that someone was up and moving. It was a boy, who was named Dirk, after the saint Theodoric, who was first long ago the patron of the church in the village. Then the cat opened her mouth and lungs again and set up a regular cat scream. This wakened all her other relatives in the village, and every Tom and Kitty made answer until there was a cat concert of meows and caterwauls. The boy heard, rushed downstairs, and opening the door, listened. The wind blew out his candle, but the brave lad was guided by the sound which the cat made. Reaching the bank, he threw off his wooden clumps, plunged into the boiling waters, and seizing the cradle, towed it ashore. Then he woke up his mother and showed her his prize. The way the baby laughed and crowed, and patted the horn of milk, and kicked up its toes in delight over the warm milk which was brought, was a joy to see. Near the hearth in the middle of the floor, little Double, the cat, was given some straw for a bed, and after purring joyfully, was soon like the baby, sound asleep. Thus the cat warned the boy, and the boy saved the baby, that was very welcome in a family where there were no girls, but only a boy. When Honey grew up to be a young woman, she looked as lovely as a princess, and the church was married to Dirk. It was the month of April, and all the world was waking to flowers, when the wedding procession came out of the church, and the air was sweet with the opening of the buds. Before the next New Year's Day arrived, there lay in the same cradle, and put to sleep over the same rockers, a baby boy. When they brought him to the font, the good grandmother named him Ludiger. He grew up to be the great missionary whose name in Friesland is, even today, after 1,000 years, a household word. He it was who drove out bad fairies, wild enchanters, wicked spirits, and terrible diseases. Best of all, he banished eye-bite, which was the name the people gave to witchcraft. Ludiger also made it hard for the naughty elves and sprites that delude men. After this, it was easy for all the good spirits that live in kind hearts and noble lives to prosper. The wolves were driven away and became very few, while the cattle and sheep multiplied until everybody could have a woolen coat, and there was a cow to every person in the land. But the people still suffered from the floods that from time to time drowned the cattle and people, and the ebb tides that carried everything out to sea. Then the good missionary taught the men how to build dams that kept out the ocean and made the water of the rivers stay between the banks. The floods became fewer and fewer, and at last rarely happened. Then Santa Claus arrived to keep alive in the hearts of the people the spirit of love and kindness and good cheer forever. At last, nearly 100 years had passed away. Little Honey, once the girl baby, and then the dear old lady who was kind to everybody and prepared the way for Santa Claus, passed away. Then also little Double the cat, that had 9 lives in one, went with her. They buried the lady under the church floor and stuffed the cat that everybody, kittens, boys, girls, and people, loved. By and by, when the cat's tail and fur fell to pieces, the ears tumbled off, and its glass eyes dropped out, a skilful artist chiseled a statue of little Double, which still stands over the tomb in the church. Every year, on Santa Claus Day, December 6th, the children put a new collar around its neck and talk about the cat that saved a baby's life. And that is the end of the story. Hmm. That one was very interesting. Very much just a story of village life and some quite miraculous happenstance of a cat that floated away in the cradle with a baby. I suppose it was interesting in its own way. Well, hello, Zemo. Hopefully, I end up on the desk one day. I feel like I really need to get an even bigger desk. Soon I'm really going to run out of space. Might even have to invest in some shelves. Oh, thank you for the head pat, Iro. I do very much enjoy them. Oh, Iro, would you like to be on the desk with my collection of plushy little sweethearts? Perhaps, perhaps. I do love all of my darlings very much. Look at them. They're so cute. Oh, Bard. One day, I hope to also have a little plush Imogen just for myself. A cutesy little thing to cuddle. Now, how long have we been going for? Over an hour and 40 minutes. That's quite nice. I think I think we might even have time for one more. Oh, Bard. Well, thank you so much for your care package. Ah, mm, oh, oh, I think my back really needed that one. Oh, okay. Oh, goodness. I will roll out my shoulders a little bit. Make sure I am in at least a manageable posture. Oh, it is very important that I'm not hunched over like a shrimp. Hopefully, I'll manage to sit upright. Now, I think we might have time for one last story for this evening. This one is pretty interesting, I think. I've only really had chance to skim over most of these because I did want to also surprise myself. I think it's quite nice to share the experience with you, my darlings. Reading a new story, seeing what it's about, finding it quite interesting, or maybe just a little strange. Now, I've had my mandatory drink of water. I think we can carry on with the last story of the evening. This one is called Prince Spinhead and Miss Snow White. And it goes something like this. Long, long ago, before the Romans came into the land, and when the fairies ruled in the forest, there was a maiden who lived under an oak tree. When she was a baby, they called her Bundlekin. She had 4 brothers who loved their younger sister very dearly and did everything they could to make her happy. Her father was a famous hunter. When he roamed the woods, no bear, wolf, or ox, roebuck, deer, or big animal of any kind could escape from his arrow, his spear, or his pit trap. He taught his sons to be skillful in the chase, but also to be kind to the creatures when captured. Especially when the mother beast was killed, the boys were always told to care for the cubs, whelps, and kittens As for the smaller animal, oh, for the smaller animals, foxes, hares, weasels, rabbits, these were so numerous that the father left the business of hunting them to the lads, who had great sport. The house under the oak tree was always well provided with meat and fur. The four brothers brought the little animals which they took in the woods to make presents to their sister, so there was always a plenty of pets: bear and wolf cubs, wild cats, kittens, and baby aurochs for the girl to play with. Every day, while the animals were so young as to be fed on milk, she enjoyed frolicking with the four-footed babies. When they grew bigger, she romped and sported with them, as if she and they were equal members of the same family. The older brother watched carefully so that the little brutes, as they increased in size, should not bite or claw his sister, for he knew the fierce nature that was in wild creatures. Yet the maiden had wonderful power over these beasts of the forest, whether little or big. She was not very much afraid of them, and often made them run by looking at them hard in the eye. While the girl made a pet of the animals, her parents made a pet of her. The mother prepared the skins of the wolves and bears until these were soft, keeping the fur on, to make rugs for the floor and winter coats for her children. The hides of the aurochs sufficed for rougher use, but from what had once been the clothes of the fawn, the weasel, the rabbit, garments were made that were smooth enough to suit a baby's tender flesh. The forest folk wrapped their infants in swaddling bands made of these dressed pelts. After feeding the darling, the mother hung her baby up, warmly covered, to a tree branch. The cradle, which was a furry bag, was made of the same material and swung in the wind. Bundlekin usually fell asleep right after she had her breakfast. When she woke up crowing, the squirrels were playing all around her. She even learned to watch the spiders spinning their houses of silk without being afraid. When Bundlekin grew up, she always called this curious creature that could make silk Spinhead. She jokingly called it her lover in remembrance of baby days. It was funny to see how deft the mother was with her needles, fashioned from bone, and her rough thread, which was made of the intestines of the deer. From her own childhood in the woods, Bundlekin's mother had been used to this kind of dressmaking. Now, when her daughter had grown from babyhood and through her teens to be a lovely maiden, fair of face and strong of limb, her sweet, unselfish parent was equal to new tasks. To the soft leather coats made from the skins of fawns, martens, and weasels, she added trimmings of snow-white ermine. Caps and mittens, cloaks for the boys, and coverings for the feet were fashioned to fit neatly. Fringes here and there were put on them until her girl looked like a king's daughter. In summer, the skins of birds and their feathers clothed her lightly and with many and rich colors, while the forest flowers decked her hair. In winter, in her white forest robes, the maiden, except for her rosy face and sparkling eyes, seemed as if she might have been born of the snow, or was a daughter of the northern ice god at Ulrum. And because she was so lovely, her parents changed her baby name and called her Driffa, which means Snow White. Yet, though no other girl in Gelderland equaled, and none, not even the princesses, excelled Snow White in beauty of face, form, or raiment, the maiden was not happy, even though many lovers came to her and offered to marry her. Some, as proof of their skill as hunters, brought the finest furs the forest furnished. Others showed their strengths or fleetness of foot. Some bargained with the kabouters or fairies of the mines to bring them shining ore or precious gems which they offered to Snow White. Others, again, went afar to get strange wonders, amber and ambergris, from the seashores of the far north to please her. One fine fellow, who had been in the south and was proud of his travels, told her of what he had seen in the great cities and offered her a necklace of pearls. But all was in vain. Every lover went away sorrowful, for Snow White wearied of them and sent each one home disappointed. Perhaps Snow White liked girls, but that's not part of the story. That's just my wishful thinking. Last of all, among the lovers came a strange looking one named Spinhead, resembling a spider, promising a secret worth more than furs, gold, gems, or necklace. But the mother, seeing the ugly creature, drove it off with hard words. So the months and years passed until her father feared he would not live to see his daughter a wife. But one day, when all in the household were absent, the leaves of the oak tree rustled loudly. There was no wind, and Snow White, surprised, strained her ears to find out what this might mean. Soon she could make out these words: "When the spider that you called Spinhead comes to make love to you, listen to him. He is the wisest being in all the forest. He knows the future. He will tell you a secret. I shall pass away, but what he teaches you shall live." Then the leaves of the oak ceased to rustle, and all was quiet and still again. While wondering what this message might mean, down came the real spider she had named Spinhead. He lowered himself from a tree branch high above on a silken thread. The creature sat down on the log beside the maiden, but she was not in the least startled, and did not scream nor run away. Indeed, she spoke to the spider as an old friend. "Well, playmate of my babyhood, what have you to tell me?" "I came to offer you my love. You need not marry me yet, but if you will let me spin a web in your room, I shall live there, and by reward you. Let me be in your sight always, and you will not be sorry for it." The maiden had no sooner agreed than a terrible tempest uprooted the oak and levelled the trees of the forest. In a moment more, a new and very beautiful house rose up out of the ground. It was as noble to look at as a palace. Nearby was a garden, and one day, when she walked in it, out of it sprang a blue flower, almost under her feet. Choose the best room of your own self, said Spinhead, and then show me my corner. After 100 days, if you treat me kindly, I shall reveal the secret of that blue flower. Driffa, the maiden, chose the sunniest room and gave Spinhead the best corner, near the window and close to the ceiling. At once he began to weave a shining web for his own house. She wondered at such fine work, which no human weaver could excel, and why she was not able to spin silk out of her head, nor even with her fingers, like her strange lover. But the oak had promised that Spinhead would reveal a secret, and she was curious to know what it was. Like all girls, she was in a hurry to have the secret. To ease her impatience, Driffa looked on, while Spinhead was thus busy at making his dwelling place with shining threads, which he spun out, never ceasing. She was so intent upon watching him that night came down before she noticed that her room was not furnished. There was not even a bed to sleep on. Spinhead looked at her closely and then spoke with a deep voice like a man's. Ah, I know, you want a bed and pretty things for your room. In another moment, soft furs lined the floor, and soon all that Driffa had possessed in the forest for comfort she had now, and more. Lost in wonder as she was, in a few minutes she was fast asleep. She dreamed she wore a dress of some strange, new, white fabric, such as her people had never seen before. Instead of being close in texture, like the skin of an animal, it was open work, full of thousands of little holes, yet strongly held together. It was light and gauzy, like a silvery spider's web on the summer grass before sunrise, when pearly with dewdrops. The 100 days were passing swiftly by, and Spinhead and Snow White had become fast friends. Each lived in a different world, a world within a world. She was waiting for the secret he would tell her. She bravely resolved not to be impatient, but let Spinhead speak first. One day, when autumn had come and she was lonely, she sauntered out into the garden. The chill winds were blowing and the leaves falling, till they covered the ground like a yellow carpet. One fell into her hand as if it bore words of friendly greeting. Yet, though she waited, not one of the millions of them brought a message to her. Never a word had she ever heard from her parents and brothers. The blue flower had long ago fallen away, and there was nothing in its place but a hard, rough, black stalk. Then she said to herself, "Is there anything in this ugly stick? How will Spinhead reveal his secret?" Never had she been so cast down. Again the tempest howled. All the winds of heaven seemed to have broken loose. Many a sturdy oak lay prostrate. The leaves darkened the air so that Snow White could see nothing. Then there was a great calm. The maid cleared her sight, and lo, there beside her stood a youth more beautiful than any of her brothers, or her lovers, or any man she had ever seen. He was dressed in fine white clothing, excelling in its texture any skin of fawn or animal of the forest. Instead of being leather, however soft, it seemed woven of a multitude of threads. In his hand he held the black stalk of what had been the blue flower. "I am Spinhead," he said. "The 100 days are over, the spell is broken, and my deliverance from enchantment has come. I bring to you, as my gift, this ugly stalk on which the blue flower bloomed." Between surprise at the change of Spinhead from a spider to a handsome youth, and disappointment at such a present offered her, Snow White was struck silent. She could hardly draw her breath. Was that all? "Break it open," said Spinhead. Splitting the stalk from end to end, the maiden was surprised to find inside many long silky fibers, almost as fine as the strands in a spider's web. She pulled them out, and her eyes danced with joy. "Plant the seeds, and let the blue flowers bloom by the million," said the youth. "Then gather the stalks, and from the fibers weave them together, and make this. The black rod is a scepter of wealth." Then, separating the delicate strands one by one, Spinhead wove them together. The result was a rich robe of a snow-white fabric, never seen in the forest. It was linen. Snow White clapped her hands with joy. "This for your wedding dress, if you will marry me," said Spinhead. Snow White's cheeks blushed red, but she looked at him, and her eyes said, "Yes." "Wait," said Spinhead. "I'll make you a bridal veil." Once more his fingers wrought wonders. He produced yards of a gauzy, open-work stuff. He made it float in the air first, then he threw it over her head. It trailed down her back and covered her rosy face. It was lace. Happily married, they left the forest and traveled into the land where the blue flax flowers made a new sky on the earth. Soon, on the map, men read the names of cities unknown before. At a time when Europe had no such masses of happy people, joyous in their toil, Curtail, Tournai, Ypres, Ghent, and Bruges told what the blue flower of the flax had done for the country. More than gold, gems, or the wealth of forest or mine was the gift of Spinhead to Snow White for the making of Belgic land. And that's the end of the story. I'm having some tea and orange juice now. That's very lovely, Bart. Oh, you saying kabooters is so cute? Oh, what do you mean? Well, it is the first time that I've seen this word, so I hope I'm saying it correctly. I suppose they are some kind of equivalent of dwarves, maybe, or spirits living down in the mines, or perhaps something similar. Oh, and thank you so much for the head pat. You know I like them very much. Oh, yes, okay, so they are dwarves. Very nice. Okay, sweethearts. I think that is quite enough for story time tonight. We made significant progress in our little book of Dutch fairy tales. How many did we do? The mermaid, the boy who wanted more cheese, the princess with the 20 petticoats, the cat and the cradle, and Prince Spinhead and Miss Snow White. Oh, that was quite nice. We did manage to get through 5. I hope that you, my darlings, thoroughly enjoyed yourselves, because I know I certainly did. I think it was quite the lovely time. So, I think I might leave it at that. I think we're quite okay for tonight. Don't need to raid into anybody in case any of you sweethearts have fallen asleep. I wouldn't want to wake you. So, my darlings, that's it for tonight's stream and for the 5 stories we managed to go through. Thank you for the stories as always. Well, thank you very much, Bard, for being here with me and everyone else who's listening. I hope you all will have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you, Bard. Yes, I will certainly have a wonderful evening, a very soft and gentle one. And my darlings, I will catch you on Saturday. So have a very pleasant rest of the work week. I hope that you were able to catch some semblance of comfort here and have a wonderful time with me. And as I like to say, remember, my eternal light will be with you always.